Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Napoleon Total, and today we're going to be talking about the Katana, with the Enlisted event, of course. For those who don't know, the Enlisted event has rolled around, and this is going to be the Sword event, the new Enlisted drops, and you're going to be featuring a lot of weapons. One of them is the Katana, and ever since I got my own Katana, or replica of it, I have been edging to do a video about the Katana, and I just haven't found the right time, and with the Sword event rolling around, I think that this is the best time that we can do a video on the Katana. So in this video, we're going to be covering the history, the stats, which there are not a lot of stats in game, and how you should be using a Katana. So without further ado, let's just get started. And of course, this video has been made possible for the friends at Discord because you guys selected the Katana that I am literally going to be wielding in a few seconds. So thank you everyone who helped me select, or you guys selected the weapon that we're going to be featuring in this video. Starting with the history, the Katana originated from the Chokuto, and this was essentially a Japanese straight sword that was mainly revived from the Chinese Jin, or heavily inspired by the weapons on the Asia mainland. And this is mainly because of the fact that during this time, Japan was mainly influenced, or at least higher society was influenced by things on the mainland. As time went on, you see the emergence of a bend to the katana, or a curve to this blade. And this was because that most people were using this as slicing swords or cutting swords, and not as much as thrusting swords. And as time went on, they found out, the Japanese swordsmiths, the katana, the shape of the katana, or should I say the bend or the curve, was more sturdy than the original Chokuto, and is essentially starting from the evolution of straight swords to somewhat with a bend. Moving on to the Kamakura period, which is around the 12th to 14th century, the main weapon used during this time was actually the long naginata, which was essentially a glaive. This literally corresponds to meaning that samurai who essentially fought on foot during this time were essentially using a sort of a sword called the tanto, which is a elongated katana than what we have right now. Excellent for, well, cutting people, and of course, when I mean cutting people, I mean hacking them. And during this time, weapons such as the odachi became more popular. It is important to note that during this time, most of the wars were fought on horseback. The Japanese samurai were mostly known for horseback riding, archery, and if it had to come to it, swords were essentially used at last resort. As warfare moved on, you have a weapon called the katana officially emerging, and that is because samurai started to fight on foot. Or to be exact, during the Kamakura period, the ratio of infantry and samurai, to be exact, ashigaru and samurai, was somewhere around 1:1 or 1:2 for some armies. As the Sengoku Jidai, when the time in which the Warring States officially began during the 16th to, well, early 17th century, we do have somewhat of a larger population of foot soldiers. To be exact, ratio between samurai and ashigaru was around 1 to 10. Well, of course, one being samurai. This means as samurai were becoming more infantry, they needed a sword that was smaller, but at the same time have a same thrust, which enters the katana. This is a sword that is somewhat shorter, but it is not as much compared to other weapons. And this is mainly because Japanese soldiers, or samurai, were starting to fight on foot. And there was no need for a massive glaive, or a massive blade that you really can't use properly on foot. Hence, you have a shorter katana, and as of right now, during the time of Sengoku Jidai, the katana was also reserved as a secondary weapon. As a matter of fact, it's almost not even considered a secondary weapon, considering that the fact that most people from this time were actually killed by muskets, to be exact, teppo, or in some cases the Tanegashima teppo. And the reason was because as the Europeans came to Japan, weapons that originally populated the battlefield, such as naginatas, bows, arrows, and in some cases, if they run out of all those, the katana, finally, Europeans, they introduced a thing called guns, to be exact, matchlocks. And Japanese, seeing how effective they were, mass-produced them. As a matter of fact, a fourth of the Japanese army at one time was made up of matchlocks. This was, to be exact, during the Imjin War. As time moved on, the katana was essentially referred to a status weapon. This was especially during the Edo period, in which Japan moved out of the warring states and samurai eventually became more and more bureaucratic slash, well, not warlike. And from that point on, we move on to the Meiji Restoration, in which during this time there were a few ideas for swords, as swords became more quote-unquote European styled, and we do have the introduction of European swords. For the intensive purpose of this video, we're not going to be really going on about that. The first type of military sword, or was what's called the Gunto, and this was essentially a weapon used by Japanese soldiers, although it would be between the years of 1935 and 1945, because this was the time in which Japan was massively expanding its army, and with the rise of nationalism, we do have a sword that is closely resembled to the warrior culture, that being the katana. The Gunto was essentially a weapon that was given to field officers, warrant officers, and officers such as majors, corporals, and literally anything in between, all the way up to, well, generals. Of course, generals who essentially do have their own swords, they could be literally transferred down from the generation, and regarding to every officer class, there was generally an idea of how these officers were equipped. For example, the Type 94 Shingonto was essentially given to officers, and essentially became a symbol of the Imperial Japanese Army. Of course, this should come as no surprise. The Type 95 Shingonto was essentially given to NCOs, and the Type 98 was essentially given to officers as a replacement for all the swords mentioned above, and to essentially ease the supply of, well, making swords. And this was especially in the case of late 1945, in which Japan's supply of materials was drying up, and what ends up happening is that these swords became essentially more and more mass-produced, while at the same time their quality decreased. And that is the history of the Japanese katana. Of course, I'm way oversimplifying because I do not have time, and I do think this video is starting to get over time. So without further ado, let's move on to the sword itself. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Napoleon, and this is me in the bloody flesh, and in this case we have a katana, which is a replica of a katana in which I managed to pick up at a shop, and it's actually a very sharp version of a katana, and it's actually pretty cool if you ask me. Of course, behind me is a bloody stand with a helmet on top. The idea is that I would use the katana to hack the stand, not the helmet, because I don't want to destroy the helmet or my katana. But moving on to the katana itself, we have the scabbard, the handle, and the tsuba, which is the hand guard. And of course, to open a katana is actually quite simple. You can do that, but holding katana is arguably more harder because you have to put your hand on the tsuba while holding it, and to open the katana, you essentially have to take your main hand and then open the katana itself, or unsheath it. Of course, now let's move on to target practice. Finally, let's move on to the in-game performance, which is actually quite simple. If you can hit the enemy, they're guaranteed death. I kid you not, death will come their way. But considering this is a gun game and not a sword game, we do have the issue of how do you get close, and it's actually harder than it seems. For one, charging across an open field to cut your enemies is a very fun way to die. And notice how I say to die, because this is not a very good idea in the long run if you want to get kills. When using a katana, it's ideal that you, well, number one, flank. Flanking is actually the best idea. Running with a katana also does make you faster, meaning that if you flank or attack them from a surprise location, then you are almost guaranteed to get some kills before you are eventually shot or gunned down. And almost 99% of the time, you will be gunned down because you're fighting a game with guns, especially if guns that have bayonets, which is why the katana historically was a secondary weapon. And as time went on, it was a status symbol. But needless to say, when using a katana or any sword for that matter of fact, I highly suggest that you attack people who do not pay attention. And also use your stamina. Stamina is to your advantage, and only attack if you have enough stamina to cut at least 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to people. If you can cut as many as them down, then you are almost getting your worth out of the katana. In my personal opinion, the katana is a very hard weapon to use because, well, people who are just shooting you can kill you with one shot if you're unlucky, and, well, the katana is hard to use because everyone's holding a gun, so that's that. Historically speaking, the Japanese katana during World War II, there were essays written about it in which how NCOs would use this in combat, especially in combat, to cut off people's arm, or to wound them enough in which they drop and you can, well, kill the person after that. But in reality, in-game, that is a different story. You really can't aim for the arm, you just kill them with one go, so that's great. Hence, overall, the katana is a very hard weapon to use. In my personal opinion, it's also a very fun weapon to use, and if you can get a kill, it's very rewarding, because it practically means that you know what you're doing. So without further ado, this is the video on the katana. Hope you like the introduction, hope you like the history, hope you like the image of me wielding a katana, and hope you like me explaining how to use a bloody katana. So without further ado, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.